Okay, we're moving forward with our shurim here on Sefer Yeshua. So one thing that we left off with, which we didn't finish, was discussing the sugya of נשים, במלחמת מצווה. So we started with the Gemara site and Daf Dalet. It's a very big sugya. Everyone has lots to say. Many of the roads lead to the sugya of נשים being מחויב in Parsha Zachar, if they're מחויב in Milchemes Amalek, which is not our Indian, which is not our sugya, so we're not dealing with that. I tried to just keep it concise and keep it to the Indian, and I decided that it would be good to go through together a tshuva in the Tzitz Eliezer in Chelek Chof, volume 20, Siman Lamed Aleph, I believe it is, and this is what he says. He was saying this as a hadron on Masechta Nazir and Soita, so he goes through a Gemara in Nazir and talks about our Gemara and Soita that we discussed last time. This is the following. So the Gemara says in Nazir Daf Nun Tes, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Aimer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Minayin shalei teitze isha b'klei zayin l'milchama. How do you know that a woman is not allowed to go out with, she's not allowed to walk around with armor in a war? Talmud Lemar, the pasuk says, Lo yiyeh kli gever al isha, there shouldn't be the kalim, the vessels of a man on a woman, the clothing of a man on a woman. And the Mefarish over there, in place of Rashi, says, Sholochen Ratzinu b'yoel eshes echaver hakeni sholo hargose l'sisr b'klei zayin el b'yosei sholo laver l'isr l'silbash. The Mefarish over there, who's a Rishon, who's probably a Talmud of Rashi, says that we find by Yoel eshes echaver hakeni and Sefer Shoftim that she didn't kill Sisra with a regular sword, but with a big peg, a yosed, that she smashed into his head, and that's how she killed Sisra. And the idea over there is that she shouldn't be over in the Isser of Lesilbash, like the Gemara says. And as I state in Rambam, in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Yud Beis Halacha Vav, the Lesilbash Isha Shurya and Kayotzeba, a woman shouldn't wear armor. The halacha is gepaskin to Sven Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea, Simon Kuf Pei Beis Hey. In Gefian Nira, that this Isra of Leisilbash is Chal, because it's not the derech of a woman to be fighting, like the Gemara says in Yavamis, and Daf Samachem and Beis, and the Gemara says in Kedushin Daf Beis and Beis, that it's specifically the derech of an ish to make milchama, and not the derech of an isha to make a milchama. Right? You have that story with Alexander Smirtin, Alexander the Great, with the Irsha Kula Nashim, which is a whole separate shmuz in and of itself. So, being that it's not Darko Shel Isha, Lasis Milchama, it's not the way of women to wage wars, to fight, to be conquerors, so then the Isser, this lav of Liyik, Ligever Lisha applies. So, Rashi says over there, Zesha Matzinu Biyal Eshes Chemer. Fine, so we spoke of Rashi says, in the Gilin Hashas over there, Reb Kiveger is Matzayin to the Targum in Shoftim, and he brings it from the Yalkut in Shoftim as well. The Yalkut in Mishlei says in the Pasuk in Eshes Chayil, which is Gedarshant on the different Neshei Chayil throughout the Tanakh. So it says, the Pasuk says, Yodeha Shulcha Bakishor, her hand was sent to the Kishor, which was probably Lashon of Kasher. That's Yoel, Shaleha Gosa B'Klizayin El B'Yosei, the Chsiv Yod El Yosei Teshlachna. She stuck her hand, she stretched out her hand to get this Yosei, to get this peg. Why didn't he kill her with regular sword? That a woman should not be carrying around the begadim. See, it's interesting that the pasuk, we're used to Leisilbash as being a Isra of clothing, but it's more than that because the pasuk says Caleb. Gifi Hanira, the understanding is that the reason why Devaira Hanaviyah didn't want to be mitzdarf, didn't want to join together for the war against Sisra until Barak told her. This is a whole parasha, a whole sugya in Sefer Shoftim, that Barak said to Devaira, if you're going to come with me, then I'll go. If you're not going to come with me, I'm not going to go. What was this business of going or not going? And then they ended up going, because she wasn't going to go to the war without him. Because, and not only that, but the concept is that really she was going to be the one that was going to give Hatzlacha to this whole war. So being that she was the leader of Klal Yisrael at the time, she had to go. But not because it was the derech of Nashim to go, and also it's not really the derech of Nashim to be Shefetes either, which is, hopefully we'll get to Sefer Sheftim to discuss what that was all about. But she had no choice because she was the leader of Klal Yisrael, so she had to go. And then she also told Barak, and she says, Holech Elech Imcha, Efes Ki Loisiya Sefartech Ala Derech. Because he didn't want to do something, she didn't want to do something that would go against halacha. And even if the pasuk makes it sound like she went to see what was going on in the battlefield, Alpi Pashtus, she didn't actually take part in the Milchama, she just went to oversee what was going on, or to give chizik, or maybe both, to the people that were there. Because she wanted to go and follow the halacha and to do what she had to do. Like the Barbanel says in Sefer Sheftim over there, and he explains that she didn't go down to the Milchama, she stayed on the mountain. The whole reason why she went was to give chizik and to be mamshech, the Liban Shel Yisrael, to fight this battle against Sisera. Sisera came with a huge army, which we'll see about in Sefer Sheftim, and it was a difficult situation. But being that she was a Shefetes, and she was a Neviah, and she was the person that Klal Yisrael looked up to at that time, so then she had the responsibility to be there with them. Agam, that it's not proper for a woman to be standing in front of the whole nation, and or to be fighting like we're speaking. But Al Kapanim, she went down to see. But like the Barbanel says over there. Now, if you take a look in the Chizkuni, on the pasuk of Le'yeh Kli Gevra Elisha in Parshas Kiseitze, he says the following: Le'yeh Kli Gevra Elisha Lefisha Hu Gnai U'Pritzus. It's an embarrassing and it's a pritzus for a Kli Gever to be on a woman. L'kach lenotlo Yoel Cherav Echanis. That's why Yoel didn't take a sword or a spear. Elahama Keves. She took a small. It's not coming to mind right now, but a small thing that she used to bang, small hammer, so to speak, to bang the peg into his head. L'machetz Raka Sisra, to smash Sisra's head open. It's interesting that Chizkuni tells it to this Gemara in Nozir, that the concept is the reason why this parsha is next to the parsha of Milchama is to tell you this idea that even when it comes to a Milchama, a woman doesn't fight. She could be involved in the Milchama, as we'll see later. She prepares food for the people and whatever, and so on and so forth, but she doesn't take part in the actual fighting. And he says, a woman's job is to be a mother. If women are gonna get accustomed to fighting in wars, it's gonna bring lideznus, and it's very problematic. Now we know that the Torah says when it comes to Eishes Yifas Torah, the Lidibra Torah Ela Keneged Yitzhahara, right? So we know that when there's a time of Milchama, it's great upheaval. And there's a lot of rage and a lot of mixed emotions in a sense, as we'll speak later. But it's very difficult for a person to be shemer himself from these things. So to make things more difficult for a person to be able to control his Yitzhahara, the Torah says that women don't belong there. And if she's going to go to Milchama, she's going to become Ragil and Znus. And Al Derech Zed Ibn Ezra writes as well that the Nismachu Bavor Zoisel Milchama Ki Isha Le'Nivris Kim Lakim Zera V'mi Teitei Manoshim Milchama Tavili Deznos. It's like almost a guaranteed fact, and I'm not here to say any war stories or anything, but I think we kind of know what happens. That people get very hyped up and very excited, and they, for whatever it is, and then they could be nechshel. I mean, that's what the Eishes Yifas Torah is about. And just the Gemara says in Kedushin that that it's not darka shel isha b'milchama, because it's not a derech for her to be kaivish. And it's interesting that in Parashas Bereishis, the pasuk of Yeshua was Nema la'odam, and that's by the mitzvah of Piri V'Rivya, so it has to be done right. Now we spoke previously that the Maral says by Yaakov Avinu that by Yaakov Avinu the ikar was the bun. The ikar was to have the children, not even the nashim. The nashim were tafel to that because the nashim was just a chetimtza to bring out the bun. Now we know that by Esav was just the opposite. The Iker of Esav wasn't the children. He didn't care for the children. All he cared about was the Nashim. He cared about Znus. Which is true because that was the derech of Esav. He was a Ish Tzaydish Sada. Idea Tzaydish Sada. And Shteit Chazal that he was Tzad Nashim Mitachas Baleim. He would take women away from their husbands. And the Hemshech HaPasuk, the Pasuk continues, and the Pasuk says, V'azarta mesachayim, that's how the Pasuk ends off. And we'll see, later we'll say that could say now also, that V'azarta mesachayim, you'll help your brothers when you're going over the Yarden. So it says, it says, I didn't see this anywhere, but it came to mind that V'azartam is the same oisiyos as uzaratam, and you should plant. That the concept is that they have to plant and to be Zayreya and to be Neiteya and Eretz Yisrael be established Zayin, meaning that they have to, that the people, right now they're in the Milchama and the Shevesh Shekivshu and Shevesh Shechilku, and we know the B'shas Milchama, B'shas Rava, the Gemara says in Tainus that B'shas Rav, it's also B'tav Shamita, which we're going to be discussing later on in the Sugyas of Atabasi, when the Malach came to Yeshua, he told him that he was Mevatel them. So then we'll discuss that Indian, but that's the Indian of Zeratim. That the Indian of Milchama is to be Marbe Kedusha in Klal Yisrael and to Lehisrachik Min Akir, to stay away from disgusting things. And we spoke previously that there's an Indian of Kedusha, this Milchama specific. In as much as the Torah is matter you to take a Yifas Torah by regular Milchama, but by this Milchama, we learned that there's a specific direction that Klal Yisrael was going to be on a level of Kedusha that they would be able to be Shemer themselves and they wouldn't have to fall to that madreg, to fall to that lowliness, that they would have to come on to Eishes Yifas Torah, which leads to Ben Seir Umayra v'chulu v'chulu. But the idea is that Zeratim is going to be that it's going to be only B'Kedusha, that the Leda and the whole idea of the Ishus over here is going to be all B'Kedusha, and that was the Haftacha that we spoke previously about. And now we could start to the Indian a little bit more, because we spoke from the Bnei Soscha that there was an idea over here that the reason why these Shvatim were on the Ever Yarden and didn't go into Eretz Yisrael together with everybody else is because there was a mashu who have a pagam by their Leda by Yaakov Avinu, and this is the Milchama of Kedusha Keneged Yetzirah when they're coming into Eretz Yisrael, and we have to take as much Kedusha as we can. It's not a physical battle on the ground. We're dealing with, in the spiritual cosmos, we're trying to overcome these 7 great powers of Tuma, of Klippa, and we'll talk about this in Mitzvah Shem weiter, but the concept is that because there's a specific Kedusha that we have to hold ourselves to the level of, there's also going to be a specific Yetzirah that's going to try to detract us from that and take us away from that also. And we spoke that's the Indian that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yeshua 3 times, Chazak ve'amatz, and that's the difference between Chazak and Amatz. El Malei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oizeloi and Yoveloi. And that's Azarta Mesachayim, you'll give Chizik, Ishes Re'eu Yazeru, Uleochiv Yom Chazak. And that's the concept over here that El Malei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Oizeloi and Yoveloi, and that's why it says Vazarta Moiso. In Inyane Kedusha, they'll have who to talk to, they'll have who to be mechazik themselves with. Okay, now, and we're going to see in a little bit the Sefer Chinuch that talks about the Indian of Lo Yisim Laskever El Isha, which is specific to Klei Zayin. So there's 2 Isurim over here in the terms of Klei Zayin and Nashim b'Milchama. Number 1, there's an Isur for a woman to walk around with Klei Zayin, to carry Klei Zayin on her, armory on her, and there's another Isser of Yitzil L'Milchama together with men. If you want to know, he doesn't discuss this here, but if you want to know if there's any heter or any mokim b'chlal for a whole battalion of just women, then maybe, but there might still be an Isser of Nasias Klei Zayin, so I'm not sure. So we learn from here that the Isser is even when the Milchama is a Milchemes Mitzvah or a Milchemes Chayva, because of Milchemes Sisra. The Raya is from Milchemes Sisra with Yoel that everybody's bringing, because it was definitely a milchama from the Shiva Umas, which was a milchama on the fighting against the Canaanim. And even if it wasn't, it was a milchama of Ezra mi'atzar haloichet. And the pasuk says, "Beferish over there in Sheftim v'ulochatz es bnei Yisrael v'chazka es Shona." He was making pressure on the Yidden, bothering them, disturbing them for 20 years, and then Klal Yisrael fought against that. And just interesting, because the chalutzim that we're going to talk about later, the chalutzim were the ones that were ma'avir the lachatz. They were the ones that removed the lachatz of Sisra. Chalutzim and lachatz, the same OCAs. And it's the exact opposite of it, because lachatz means to place pressure on something, and chalutz means chalutz hanal, to take off the shoe, to remove something from it. And we also find in the Sefer Bamidbar that that when it came to the milchama, when it came to any of the milchamas, by the countings of Klal Yisrael, it says Zohar l'Gulgul Leisa. Also in the Tanai of Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, doesn't talk about the Nashim fighting. It's fakert. It says that they're not going to go with the Kol Chalutz Tzva L'Fnei Hashem L'Milchama. Even though it was Be'etzim HaMilchemes Mitzvah, they were going to stay in the Arei HaGilad. If they would have been part of the mitzvah, then they would have came. Unless you want to say that this Milchama was specific. I mean, the pasuk over here does say that Neshechem Tavchem Umiknechem Yeshua Bartz Shenasel Chamesh Brevei HaYarden. But why would this Milchama be any different? I mean, this Milchama would be the first one. Why would this one be any different than any other Milchama previously? Or any Milchama going forward? Why should there be any nafkamina? Now, be'emes, there is a machlekes rishonim that, who are all the people that went over? Was it everybody? Everybody, only the people that were eligible to fight. And even amongst the ones that were eligible to fight, was kol gibarei hachayil, what's the kol coming to be marba? Fine, but al kalpanim, whoever they were, everyone agrees that nashim are pturos from this, even from a Milchemes Mitzvah, and there's no need for the Torah to go and repeat that it was a davar pashut to Chazal that nashim were parted from a Milchama, until they held that that the Torah doesn't have to repeat any time when there's a Milchama what they have to do. And if the Torah says that, by Milchemes Midyan, that's one of the rayos that they bring. It says, so the question is, why does it say, Chazal say, why are we saying Anoshim? So Chazal say that Anoshim is extra. So the Sifri Rashi brings that Hecholzu Anoshim is Anoshim Tzadikim. Like the Sifri Chacham says over there, because it didn't have to say Anoshim, because it's not the derech. It's such a davar pashut that Anoshim don't go out to Milchama B'chlal. So it's pashut that it's Anoshim, it's men. So what's Anoshim coming to teach me? Anoshim means it's going to tell me that Dafka Tzadikim are the ones that can fight the Milchama, Milchemes Midyan, which I think that the way we have to look at every Milchama in Tanakh, just like the way we look at anything else in Tanakh, everything was very miyuchad, very specific, and had its own rules and regulations, and had its own dimensions, and cannot necessarily be compared to anything else. Now, the issue with everything that we've been saying until now is that we have this mission in Saita and Daf Mem Daled. So how do we find for that sugi with the sugi? L'chayr, the sugis are says to each other. Because the Mishnah says, so, l'chayr, it's a kasha from this Gemara. So, l'chayr, it's like in the Gemara Nazir. I mean, the Mishnah over here doesn't say what they do, which is stam ha'arat, that why not, right? So what's in as much as the Mishnah does say what the Meshuach Milchama does, the Mishnah doesn't say exactly how they fought. It just says what the job of the Meshuach Milchama is. But Akapanim, it says, Afilu Chosam Echedra, V'Kalam Echupasa, they're the ones that have to take part in the Milchemes Mitzvah, the Milchemes Chayva. So then, if you're taking a Kalam Echupasa, that's very clear that Nashim are Mechuyev. So in what capacity, maybe? So that's a Shaila. The Minchas Chinuch in Mitzvah Tov Reish Gimel is asking on the Sefer HaChinuch that he says by the Mitzvah of Zechiras Mechias Amalek that the Mitzvah is noyeg only with males, B'schorim, because they're the ones that make the war, and the ones that fight against the enemies are men and not women. And the Minchas Chinuch asks that by Milchemes Mitzvah we have the Mishnah that says I feel so even by Amalek l'chayra, there's makom to say that nashim, not there's makom to say, it's pretty clear that nashim should have to go out to the milchama. So why not? Agav, we learn from here that the chinuch also holds b'pshitus that nashim are part from milchemes mitzvah and a milchemes chayva. But if you look in this, if you understand the sugya well, you'll understand that it's not a question. Why? And really, it's this whole kasha teretz really is miyushiv al yedei radvaz in Hilchos Malachim, Perek Zayin Halacha Daled. The Rambam writes over there, like it says in the Mishnah, that by Melchemes Mitzvah Kol Yetzer and Filu Chasa Mechedra V'Kala Meichu Pasa, that everybody has to go out to war. And he asks, V'chidarach Hanashim Lasas Melchama, is it the way of women to make a war? V'Akosov Kol Kvuda Bas Melech Panima. The pasuk says that the entire respect and dignity of a bas melech is that she should be indoors, not fighting wars. And he writes like this, and this is his exact words. V'shleimar, Dochi Kamar. This is what he means to say. Kevin the chasen yotze mechedra, being that the chasen, he's a man, so he's going to be the one that's fighting the war, so he's going to go out mechedra. Kala yotze mechu pasa. The kala is also going to go out of her chuppah. It doesn't mean that she goes to fight. It just means she'ein in the heges yemei. If on the third day of Sheva Brachas, or even during the Chasanim, they start a war, and it's a Milchemes Mitzvah, and everybody needs to go, even the Chasan, so then they stop the Sheva Brachas right then and there, and they stop the Chasanim right then and there. They take him out of the chuppah, but it doesn't mean that she goes. And it's possible that by Melchemes Mitzvah, the woman would distribute water and food to their husbands. And that's the minig in some areas, in some places. So he says like this. Before, let's just think about what he says for a second. Because we spoke last week, in the previous year, that we had a kasha on the Gemara, on the Balaturim in Parashas Matos, from the Gemara in Shabbos and the Gemara Ksubis, that says that Kol Yetel Melchemes David get krisis kaisev leishtoi, right? So if we're talking about that it's a Melchemes Mitzvah, so we had different stadim. It depends if it's a Melchemes Mitzvah. Was there a very strong haftacha they didn't have to rely on it, or did they, whatever it was. Now it would sound like over here that they're giving mayim umazon to their husbands. It sounds like they're coming to visit their husbands to check on them to make sure they're okay, that they shouldn't forget about each other. Now, we know that we spoke to Rambam a while back, that the Rambam says that a person, and we're going to get to this Mitzvah Shem maybe this year, maybe in the next one, that a person shouldn't be thinking about his wife and children during the war. But now, l'chayra, there's makom to speak something out, and it's kedai to mention this, as a general rule and a general concept when we're talking about milchames. Sai milchemes rishus, sai milchemes mitzvah. I think we're very aware of this mitzias, especially with the war that's going on in Israel right now. But there's the whole war, general war, and then there's the actual fighting, the infighting, meaning depending on the intensity of the fighting. So you have these battalions that go into this area in Gaza, and then they leave. And then you have those battalions that go into that area of Lebanon, and then they leave. But it's not necessarily that every single person that's involved in the Milchama is involved in the etzem fighting. So when it says that they come to see their husbands, to give them food and drink, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're on the battlefield. They're involved in the Milchama. But maybe they're not necessarily in the actual fighting. Okay, that's Stam a thought. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I don't know if anybody even says anything about that. But the Tzitz Eliezer goes weiter, and he says that you see from the first teretz of the Radvaz that he was much more comfortable with that teretz, which was that he says that the Chasam and Kala are not mamshech the chuppah, that the Sheva Brachas or whatever it is stops, that they're not mamshech to be noyig yimei chuppah, he calls it. But the second teretz that he says that, maybe because they were going to give food and drink to their husbands, he says there's only b'derech efsher. So you see that he's not so comfortable with it. So he says that the kavona of the Rambam is not that the kala goes from her chuppah to fight a war, because we said that she's not going to be fighting anyways. The kavanah is that being that the chazan is going out to war, memela the kala goes out of her chuppah and she's not mamshich to be noyik her shava brachas and her yemei chuppah, as he calls it. And he brings from a sefer Divrei Yisachar in the Chiluk Ben Ezer Simukufim test that says this on his own midas atzmai, that the nashim, the women, were never bechlal the kibush, and what the Mishnah says in Soita that they were involved in Mulchemes Mitzvah, that the chaser mechadre that afilu chaser mechadre v'kala mechupasa was that the chaser goes out of his cheder to the mulchama, even if the kala was already had a chuppah, but not that the kala herself leaves the chuppah. Also from the second teretz that the Radvaz writes that he says b'loshen efsher, that he says that the kavana is that the kala mechupasa was that she goes down to the area of the war, of the battlefield, to give her husband. I think there's a certain sneers that he's touching on. It doesn't say to give to the people. It says to give to Maimon Mozen L'Baleihem, specifically to their husbands. They're going to find their husbands to give them food and drink. But there was no hishtatus be'etzem in the actual fighting. Now, if you take a look at the Reshash insight over there, he's also emet on this kasha that nashim l'cher are not part of the Mulchama, and he says it's a chiddush, and he says v'ulai einon yoytzes ela levash of a lefes or gadoim l'tzerach hagvarim anshe Mulchama. And maybe he says that they only went down there to cook and to bake, ukadoima, and to do similar chores, I guess, to help for the needs of the men that are fighting the war. Now, what sounds very similar, or just about the same, is what the Radvaz says, but it's just a me'ain. Why? Because Rashash says that they would go bake and cook for all the people of the war. Meaning there's no difference between, whose husband, whose husband not. The Radvaz is Madgish, just the Lashon of the Radvaz, he says was to their husbands. Meaning specifically to their husbands and not to other men, which goes back to what we were talking before, that it's very possible, and there's a lot of makam to be chayshish, that there's that there be issues with znus going on during the war. Okay, but back to the actual kasha, everything would be mutual according to what we just spoke. Maybe the Rashash is talking more of Binyan Klali, that they're cooking for the men, for any of the Anshe Mulchama, maybe because he held that they gave a get creases, maybe that makes things better, maybe that makes things worse, because if they did give a guts, then they're not married, then maybe they'll end up getting married. And if they, it's a sticky situation. You have to be careful whenever you're dealing with this because of what we spoke. Okay. But the Tzitz Eliezer goes weiter and he says that he wants to bring out this idea from the Sefer Chinuch himself. And it's not just in the the way that we just explained it, but it's pretty clear in the Sefer Chinuch Alei. He says to take a look at Mitzvah Tov Kuf Chavav, that he starts off talking about the Mulchemes Mitzvah, Hakol Yotzin, Afilu Chosa Mechedra, Mikal Mechupasa. But then he ends off saying that this mitzvah is naig only by Zachar. So what's going on? He starts off saying that Afilu Chosa Mechedra, Mikal Mechupasa, and now he's saying that only men have this mitzvah. What do you mean only men have this mitzvah? What about the Kal Mechupasa? He left out something that you spoke earlier, right? But the concept is, like we spoke, that the idea is that the kavanah of Kala Mechupasa is not that she goes out to war, just that she's not Noiki Mechupa. Meaning, Avalpi, that even though the Kala is going to end up being missing out on the days of her Chuppah, but we don't consider that she actually takes part in the actual fighting, and we're not concerned about this. And, we're not concerned that she's not going to have a Shem Brachas. He's got to go fight. He goes weiter and he brings from the Sefer Hoin Oshir, I believe it's from Reb Emmanuel Chayriki, who's on the side of the Mishnayos. So he brings from the Mishnayos in Soita that this that we say, I think we mentioned this last time also, but here's actually how he brings out the Vart, that this that we say Kal Mechupasa ain't Sufik, Shein Ze Elolasas Kamosh Asa Ishal Avimelech, like Yisarach Basashal Shadad, the Bichri specific stories of when women were fought a war or carried out some military strategies that was specific for a woman, like we find by Yoel, and like we find by Yehudis and Eliporni, which he brings, right? And it's not that she's part of the war. She's standing there in her uniform together with all the men. That's bechalal not the inyan. The inyan is that could we use them? I mean, can they assist Klal Yisrael as being part of the Milchama? If we have a job to give them, then we could give them a job. But again, there's many levels of jobs, and there's many levels of jobs in the army, if you will, that doesn't constitute just fighting. They can be the cooks, like we saw from the Radvaz and from the Rashash, or they could maybe be, do some more work like we're seeing over here with Yehudis. Now, this is all not to get into the controversy of Giyas, which was a whole separate issue. That's because they didn't like the whole idea of the Israeli army, which made its own problems. But with this, we can answer another kasha on the Sefer Chinuch. The Minchas Chinuch asks in Mitzvah Tov Reish Dalet that the Sefer Chinuch asserts himself again when he writes in Mitzvah Tov Chav Hey, which is what we spoke last time, that when you kill out the Zayin Amamin, when you kill out the 7 nations that are in Eretz Yisrael, that we're talking about here in these psukim, so then women are mechuyev in this mitzvah also. But according to what we saw from the Sefer Hain Asher, it's Miyoshiv, Ki Yesh Loimar, Shekavanas HaChinuch b'mitzvah Tav Chav Hey, is that if they have the opportunity, meaning if we have the opportunity, meaning if the best way to kill this general is for a woman to set herself up, to meet with him, and to, sit down with him, and to talk to him, like the story with the Yehudis and the Chanukah story, and then she goes and takes out a gun and blasts his head off. So Navada, that's the right thing. Not that she's mechuyev in battle like men are. That's a man's job. If we could use a woman, if a woman could assist in this eifin of killing them, they have a chelik in the mitzvah also. I mean, it's their mitzvah also, but it's not that they're lechatchila on the front lines. It's just, if you think about it, call anybody that is Eres Isha, V'lo Kacha, or anybody that was Bona Bayis Lo Chanochai, anybody that has Rach HaLevav. I mean, maybe women today, maybe today they're more fighters than in those days, but, the Gemara says, Nashim Daitan Kalis, it's not a Parsha Zazach that they would be able to be standing there in the, Bahakofas Hatrisin, like the Gemara says, that there are people who are afraid of. Even by Melchemes Mitzvah, they would still have to. Meaning, if a man is afraid of the war, he would still have to. Right? We spoke, but that's not good for the morale of the army, of the other people fighting. But so again, back to the Tzitz Eliezer, he says, meaning by killing out the Zayin Umis in Eretz Yisrael, if they have the ability and they have the capability to do that they could carry out these military strategies for Klal Yisrael, so by all means. They're not exempt from the mitzvah. But it doesn't mean that all the women have to do that. The other ones can stay cooking. The other ones can do other jobs. Now, we spoke that the concept of war is that it becomes very messy. In as much as there's law and order for the army, the generals are very tough on the people of what they're supposed to do. But, so then you can set a woman up to carry out a mission. That's perfectly fine. But not that she should be standing there b'kishrei hamulchama, like we say. And also, we also know that the pasuk says that it's mi ben esrim shana v'mala was al tzivaisa. Whenever they're counting the Yidden in the 6 parish of Hamidbar Nosai, it's all al tzivaisa that you have to be 20 years old. 20 years old, that's when you have the courage to be able to fight. Till then, we're not going to say, because Chasu Mechazer Kalamechel Parsis and Ketanim also have to fight. Ketanim meaning anybody under the age of 20, which we spoke that there's a Ramban at the beginning of Parashas Bamidbar that talks about this, right? But to talk maybe a little more in our terms of what we're talking about over here in Sefer Yeshua, we know that the Gemara says, it's based on the Gemara, I'll call upon him that the Bezin Shalmala doesn't punish until a person's 20. So that's when he's able to fight in the war. because it'll have a certain seriousness, because he knows now he's Mechuyev in Beis Shamayim also. And about that, there's no welcome to say that the children, anybody under 18 would have to, anybody under 20, would have to be mishtatev in the Milchama. So there's no welcome to say that the women have to take part in the Etzem Milchama also. Could they take part in other things to support the war efforts? Avada, why not? Whether it's through davening or whether it's more active participation in the actual Milchama. There's no, if they could, they should. Why not? It's a mitzvah to get rid of these 7 nations. It's not a question. Or it's a mitzvah to protect Klal Yisrael from the enemies that are trying to attack them. There's no reason why they shouldn't. I'm not necessarily talking about Zman, I'm talking about the times of Yeshua for sure. Now, because he was saying this as a siyum, this was a drasha that he said as a siyum for Masechta Nazir and Soita. So he darshaned it a little bit and has a few other nice things which we'll share. The Gemara says, "Mulchemet mitzvah kol yotzin afilu chosim mechedra v'kala mechupasa." So this doesn't mean to say, what about the Xeras Gius, the drafting yeshiva students? We know that the Gemara says that it was a very big problem that people drafted Talmidei Chachamim to fight in the wars. And we know from the Gemara Soita and Yud, it's a parasha of Sefer Malachim, that the Melech Asa made a mistake by drafting Talmidei Chachamim into the war. Like the Gemara says, Asa nenash beraglav. Asa was punished with his feet. The Gemara says, Darash Rava mipnei ma nenash Asa. Why was Asa punished? Mipnei she'asa angaria b'Talmidei Chachamim. He was imposing upon the Talmidei Chachamim. She'nemar v'Melech Asa hishmiya es kol Yehuda einaki. The king Asa made a proclamation for all over Yehuda, and nobody would be exempt from it. My einaki. Frek the Gemara, what does einaki mean? Amar Yehuda Amarav afilu chosim mechedra v'kal mechupasa. Even a chosim mechedra v'kal mechupasa, and it was a big tiny on Asa. That's why he got punished. If you look up there, the Maharsha says that obviously the deal comes from as Kol Yehuda coming to be married even Talmidei Chachamim, and the Gemara says over there that he got a disease in his feet called pedegra. Rashi says it's a shem choili sheichis b'raglayim. It's a kind of illness that hurts a person's feet. There's a tremendous pain in a person's feet. Can't stand, can't walk, can't anything. I was thinking maybe it's a type like similar to gout or something. There's a story with Maril. Not going to get into that now. That he said something and then he got this choili in his feet, and then it went away. Now be'etzem this is a choili that doesn't go away. And he brings in the Sefer Tshuva Me'ava and Chelik Beisim and Shin Chafei and end of Hilchos Treifus that the reason why Asa specifically got this machla, why this machla specifically, because there's no refuah for it. And the Asa did an angaria, and he was Gerim a Bezayin for Talmidei Chachamim, and the Gemara says in Shabbos and Avkuf Yotesam and Beis that somebody who's Mavaza Talmid Chacham ain't refuah l'makasai. There's no refuah. And Mela he got sick in his feet with this machla, and until today, many doctors have tried, have futilely to try to arrange a refuah for it, but with no luck and no success. There was no hatzlacha in finding a refuah for this disease, and that's because he started up with Talmidei Chachamim. He didn't necessarily mean it in a bad way. Maybe he felt that maybe he felt that they needed more manpower, but you don't start up with Talmidei Chachamim. As I state the Gemara. And the Gemara says in the Dharm Daf Lamed Beis, Amar Babo, Amar Belazar, Mepnei Man Nenash Avram Avinu, V'nishtavdu Banav LeMitzrayim Asayim V'Esashonim. Why was it that Avram Avinu got punished and his children had to be enslaved in Egypt for 110 years? Mepnei Sha'asa Angaria B'Talmidei Chachamim, because he imposed a draft on the Talmidei Chachamim. You think about Avram Avinu, how can we say such a thing? As I state in Gemara, Shenema V'Yorek Es Chanich of Yelidei Beisai. Vayorek, the Ran says, Shahilichan l'mulchama, he made them go to war. Vayorek es chanichav, the hainu b'nei adam shechinich l'Torah. He took the people that he taught Torah to, and he told them, now you have to go fight. Sacha pachad of a Gemara, but that's what the Gemara says without getting into it too much. It's Hashem, we'll discuss it. And then he goes weiter and he brings another Gemara Makis Daf Yud that says, Amar B'Shuv ben Levi, Ma'edich Siva I'm just reglaim b'Sharayit Yerushalayim. What does the pasuk mean when the pasuk says that our feet were standing at the gateways of Yerushalayim? Migaram l'ragleinu sheyamdu b'mulchama. Who caused that our feet should be standing in a mulchama? Shara Yerushalayim she'oiskim b'Torah. By the gates of Yerushalayim that they were being Isaac b'Torah. And I just want to go through that Gemara inside for a second with Rashi, and maybe get to the Marsha as well. Let's find it here. Yeah. So Rashi says, B'sharayich, b'shvil sha'arayich. And because of your gateways. Because they were in the Mulchama. Rabbeinu Chananel says, Oimdos hoy ragleinu b'sharayich Yerushalayim migoram liyos oimdos ragleinu b'Mulchama shari Yerushalayim shei mitzuyonu b'halocha. So these are the Talmidei Chachamim that are taking them to war, which is not a good thing, because the Koyach HaTorah is going to protect. And let's see the Marsha. Oyim l'svei ragleinu migorim ragleinu sheyamdu mishum dahaykra ein lo yichibru l'shalamayla d'chsiv samachti b'em li'beis Hashem nelech shuloshen osid. This that it says, the pasuk previously, it says samachti, I rejoiced when they told me that they were going to the house of Hashem, which is a lashon of asid, which is a future tense. L'medaber elav l'neichach, v'im those who lashon ovar, l'medaber ba'adam. Okay, they were trying to tell David that they wanted to have the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, which we'll get back to Mitzvah Shem at a later date when we get to this Gemara, or when we get to the Pasuk and tell them, whichever one comes first. Over Al Kol Panim, that's what it says over there. And the Tzitz Eliezer goes weiter and he says that he wants to end off this Shtickle Torah with what it says in the Sefer HaChinuch Mitzvah Tavkuf Mem Beis, in the Sefer HaChinuch, about the Isav L'Yilbash. He brings a Targum Onkelos that says L'Yehei Tikkun Zayin the Gever Al Itza, that the Tikkun Zayin, the Klei Zayin, shouldn't be on a woman. And he explains Mepnei Kein Pirush HaKosav B'Klei Zayin, meaning the pasuk doesn't say what it is. It just says L'Yeh Kli Gever Alisha. Kli is Tuk Meklei Zayin over here. Why? Because this is something that's miyuchad, very specific to our nation, because it's not derech of a isha, she'ain derech isha ba'olam, what says B'Klei Zayin. There's no women in the world that should have to go fight a war. And he's masber in the Shroshei HaMitzvah, Kedei laharchik miyumasenu ha'kdoisha dvar erva. The concept is to distance ourselves from a dvar erva, and he just takes us to town. Tav Kuf Mem Beis. Let's see, we have it right here. Let's read it inside. Aval hu adin she'osel lehem d'oraisa lotzis b'malbushim sh'derech hanoshim v'esem okul n'shtamish behem. It's also referring to clothing. The Iker Mitzvah is wore, not necessarily uniforms, but the armor. The armor that the men wear is something that's specific to men, and women shouldn't have anything to do with it. To distance from our holy nation anything of erva, or any nidnud, or any tzad, any masher who was something, to be totally distant from it. The Gemara Sanhedrin, the Tzad Gimel says that they wanted to, Hashem hates znus. So, the Rishonim always wanted to get the Klal Yisrael to get involved in it. And it could be they made wars for this specific reason also. It's because HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us. He wanted us to be distant from znus. It's something repulsive. And it takes away the heart of a person, and it washes him away from the good ways. It totally removes him from a derech toiva and implants with him a derech ra, evil way, umachshava shel shtus, and thinking about foolishness. Ve'ein safek, and without a doubt, ki im yiyu malbushei ha'anashim anashim shavim, yis'arvu elu im elu tamid u'mallah ha'ara zima. If men and women would be equal in their clothing, meaning their clothing would be the same, then they would get mixed up all the time, meaning that there would be a lot of mingling between men and women because you can't differentiate what's what. So then the world would be full of zima. And the Rambam, he brings that the Rambam Maravuchim writes the same thing as well. But really, the concept of Avodah Zarah is to do znus, as we know, but it's both in Yadam together. And just interesting that he says that. And he goes weiter and he says that this is why the Torah is so machmer with the slav shel yik li gaver isha, because it's Torah bas Hashem lekacha kol eila. A person who gets involved in these behaviors is called a nitav. He's called disgusting, because the Torah understood, the Yarda Torah l'seif daita shalatam, that the Torah understands the human behavior and human psychology, and knows that if a person's parents together of this lav, you don't know where he could go, and b'sefer shel davar, he can end up doing really horrible, disgusting things. And he goes right to say that b'schus nashim tzidkaniyos, and because of their tznius, and they protected themselves with tznius, because kol kvuda bas melech penima klal yisrael l'zeicha, to have a gula from Mitzrayim and from other golias, in all areas, was always the nashim that protected klal yisrael, the avos. The job of the avos was to bring out the kedusha, was to bring out the nekuda of their children, and the job of the imahos was to protect from the outside influences. The positive influence comes from the father, but the protect from the outside influences, that comes from the imahos, that comes from the nashim tzidkaniyos. So that's the schus hanoshim, and the schus of the anoshim is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, is the mitzvah of Limud Torah, is the schus that we have to fight our wars against our enemies, like the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Daf Memtes. Ilmolei David le'asayav melchama. If not for the fact that David shahaya isik b'Torah, Rashi says le'asayav melchama. But the fact that you have as the schusim of David HaMelech was able to stand for Yoav when Yoav was fighting. Yoav was the general, Yoav was the warrior, but David HaMelech was the one that was pushing, was the one that was being menatzeach, because it was b'schus Torah. And he goes weiter and he says that Talmidei Chachamim, that they're marbim shalom ba'olam, like the Gemara says at the end of Nazir, Talmidei Chachamim marbim shalom ba'olam, shenem Hashem oizal me'yiten, Hashem evarchasam b'shalom, ein oizal l'Torah, like Rashi says in Zvachim and Daf Kuf Tei Zayin. The Torah is mo'uzan shel Yisrael, it's the strength and the pillar and the rock of Klal Yisrael. And when we're mekabel the Torah with this chus, Hashem will bench us with peace forever and ever.